At 200 feet below the surface of the Persian Gulf, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kraken Blake realized her rebreather was failing and she had 90 seconds of air left. But abandoning the mission would mean 47 American hostages would die at dawn. NHEY legends. Before we dive deep into this incredible true story, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This story of the first female Navy SEAL officer will absolutely leave you speechless. Trust me, what happens next defies every limit you thought was possible. NNMAIN, Story NTHE, Underwater Demolition Charge, felt heavier than usual in Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kraken Blake's waterproof pack as she glided silently through the dark waters of the Persian Gulf. At 32, she had become the first woman to not only complete Navy SEAL training, but to lead her own special operations team. Tonight's mission would either cement her legacy as a legend or end her life in the crushing depths of the ocean. NHER team called her Kraken, not just because she was unstoppable in the water, but because when she struck, entire enemy operations would disappear without a trace. NTHE mission briefing had been classified at the highest levels. Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces had seized a commercial oil platform and taken 47 American engineers hostage. The platform's location in international waters gave the U.S. legal authority to act, but the hostages were rigged with explosives that would detonate at the first sign of a conventional rescue attempt. Sarah was the only SEAL qualified for what command called impossible insertion, approaching the platform from below through a network of underwater support structures in a dive that would test the absolute limits of human endurance. What she didn't know yet was that this mission was designed to fail, orchestrated by someone who wanted to prove that women had no place in space. I need you to know, this mission was never meant to succeed. You're swimming into a trap. Admiral Patricia Harrison was the highest-ranking woman in naval special operations and Sarah's mentor for the past 8 years. If Admiral Harrison was breaking operational security to warn her, the conspiracy went deeper than anyone imagined. "Ma'am, what are you talking about?" Sarah whispered through her rebreather, the sound carrying through bone conduction speakers that wouldn't create air bubbles. General Marcus Webb convinced the Joint Chiefs that female SEALs are a liability. This mission was designed to demonstrate that when the pressure is highest, women will fail. The platform defenses are 3 times stronger than you were briefed. The hostages. Sarah, some of them are already dead. This is exactly where everything exploded above and below the surface. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. General Webb had opposed women in combat roles for decades, and her success in SEAL training had been a public relations nightmare for his traditional military philosophy. Webb had allies throughout the Pentagon who believed that women in special operations was a dangerous social experiment that would cost American lives. Now they were using her as proof of their theory, willing to sacrifice 47 innocent hostages and her life to make their point. NBUT's Sarah Kraken Blake hadn't survived Hell Week, underwater demolition school, and 3 years of the most dangerous special operations missions by accepting defeat when it was handed to her. "Admiral, how many hostages are actually alive?" Satellite thermal. They're being held in the platform's main processing facility, 150 feet above your current position. "Sarah, the smart play is to abort. Return to base, and we'll find another way." Sarah looked up through the dark water at the massive oil platform, looming above her like a metal mountain. Somewhere up there, 31 Americans were counting on her to do the impossible. The fact that her own command structure was betting against her only made her more determined to prove them wrong. "Wait, you haven't seen the real scope of the betrayal yet." As Sarah approached the platform's underwater support structure, her advanced sonar system detected something that wasn't in any of her mission briefings: additional explosive charges attached to the platform's foundation. Enough C4 to bring down the entire structure and kill everyone aboard, hostages, terrorists, and rescuers alike. NTHE realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just a setup to discredit women in special operations. This was a false flag operation designed to justify a larger military action in the region. General Webb and his allies were willing to murder American hostages to create the international incident they needed, and Sarah's encrypted communicator crackled again, but this time it wasn't Admiral Harrison. It was a voice she recognized from congressional hearings and Pentagon briefings: General Marcus Webb himself. "Lieutenant Commander Blake, I know you're listening. Surface immediately and abort this mission. That's a direct order from your superior officer." "With all due respect, General, you're not in my chain of command for this operation." Webb's laugh was cold and calculating. "I am now. I've assumed operational control of this mission under emergency authority. You have 5 minutes to surface, or I'll classify you as a rogue operative and authorize lethal force to stop you. NTHE moment that defined everything she believed about duty and honor. Sarah floated in the dark water, 180 feet below the surface, facing the most important decision of her military career. Obey orders and let 31 Americans die to serve a corrupt general's political agenda, or disobey direct orders and risk being hunted by her own military. NSHE thought about her father, Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Blake, who had served 3 tours in Vietnam and taught her that honor meant doing what's right, even when what's right isn't easy. He had died in a training accident when Sarah was 16, but his last words to her had been, "Don't ever let anyone tell you what you can't do because of who you are. You show them what a Blake can accomplish." NSHE thought about the 31 Americans above her, who had families, dreams, and lives that didn't deserve to be sacrificed for political games. Most of all, she thought about every woman who would follow in her footsteps and what message it would send if she backed down now. In General Webb, Sarah said into her communicator, "I respectfully decline your order. I have Americans to save." NTHE dive that would become legendary in special operations history. What Sarah attempted next had never been successfully completed in combat conditions. She had to ascend 180 feet while navigating through a maze of underwater support structures, disable multiple security systems, plant her demolition charges in precisely the right locations, and infiltrate a heavily defended oil platform, all while her own command structure was working against her. NHER rebreather was functioning at 60% capacity due to damage from the extreme depth, giving her maybe 20 minutes of air remaining. Her underwater propulsion vehicle had been sabotaged before the mission. She was certain of it now, so she had to rely on her own physical strength to cover the distance. NBUT Sarah Blake had not become the first female Navy SEAL by accepting limitations. Using techniques she had developed during her years of underwater demolition training, Sarah began what she called combat ascent, using the platform's own structure to provide cover while systematically disabling the sensors and defensive systems that protected the facility's vulnerable points. At 120 feet, she disabled the underwater motion detection system. At 90 feet, she hacked into the platform's electrical grid and created a rolling blackout that would mask her final approach. At 60 feet, her rebreather finally failed completely. NTHE impossible choice that saved 31 lives. With no air supply and still 60 feet underwater, Sarah faced the kind of decision that separates heroes from everyone else. She could attempt an emergency ascent to the surface, probably survive, but abandon the hostages to their fate. Or she could continue the mission on a single breath of air and risk drowning in the depths of the Persian Gulf. Sarah Blake chose to hold her breath and keep swimming. What happened next would be studied in Navy diving schools for decades. Sarah executed a combat breath-hold ascent that combined advanced freediving techniques with tactical swimming skills she had developed through years of SEAL training. She covered the final 60 feet to the platform's service ladder in 2 minutes and 15 seconds on a single breath, a feat that most experts considered physically impossible under combat conditions. As she breached the surface and gasped her first breath of air in over 3 minutes, Sarah could hear the sounds of her real enemy. General Webb's backup plan was already in motion. Military helicopters were approaching the platform, but Sarah's enhanced optics showed they were carrying missiles, not rescue personnel. Webb was planning to destroy the platform with all hostages aboard, then blame Iranian forces for the attack. NTHE surface battle that nobody saw coming. Sarah had less than 10 minutes before Webb's helicopters would be in missile range. Using her tactical climbing gear, she scaled the platform's exterior structure with the speed and precision that had made her legendary among special operations forces. NTHE Iranian guards were well trained, but they weren't prepared for a single operator who seemed to appear and disappear like a ghost. Sarah used non-lethal takedown techniques wherever possible. Her mission was to save hostages, not escalate an international incident. As she fought her way to the main processing facility where the hostages were held, Sarah's tactical radio came alive with transmissions that proved the scope of the conspiracy. General Webb was coordinating with defense contractors who stood to make billions from the regional conflict. His false flag operation would justify. NBUT Sarah also heard something else. Admiral Harrison had rallied loyal officers who were racing to expose Webb's plot. The battle wasn't just happening on the oil platform. It was happening in Pentagon conference rooms and congressional offices, where the real power to authorize military action resided. NTHE rescue that became a race against time. Sarah found the hostages exactly where Admiral Harrison had indicated. 31 terrified American engineers, duct-taped to chairs in the platform's main control room, with Iranian guards who looked almost as scared as their prisoners. What she didn't expect was the lead guard. "Thank God you're here. I'm CIA agent Jake Morrison. Undercover for 8 months. These aren't Iranian Revolutionary Guards. They're American mercenaries hired by Webb to stage this whole operation." NTHE revelation that the entire hostage situation was a false flag operation run by American mercenaries for American defense contractors made Sarah physically sick. But it also meant that everyone in the room, hostages, guards, and rescuer, were on the same side. "How long before those helicopters get here?" Sarah asked. 6 minutes, maybe 7. But there's something else. Webb's people planted additional explosives throughout the platform. Even if we evacuate everyone, he can still destroy the evidence and claim Iranian sabotage caused the explosion. NTHE decision that changed American military history. Sarah looked around the room at 31 terrified hostages, 1 undercover CIA agent, and 4 American mercenaries who had been lied to about the nature of their mission. Everyone in the room was a victim of General Webb's conspiracy, but only Sarah had the skills and authority to stop it. "And Agent Morrison, I need you to coordinate hostage evacuation to the platform's emergency boats. I'm going to disable Webb's explosives." "Ma'am, you can't defuse that many charges in 6 minutes." "I'm not going to defuse them. I'm going to reprogram them." What Sarah did next would be taught as a case study in both military strategy and computer warfare. She used her Navy SEAL technical training to hack into the explosive detonation system and reprogram it to destroy only the false evidence of Iranian involvement while leaving the platform structure intact. Instead of bringing down the platform, the controlled explosions would destroy the fake Iranian equipment, false intelligence files, and forged communications that Webb had planted to justify his larger military operation. The hostages were safe, the Iranian terrorists had surrendered and were revealing their American identities, and the platform was broadcasting clear evidence of the false flag operation on international frequencies. Sarah stood on the platform's highest point, using military hand signals to communicate with the helicopter pilots who suddenly realized they had been ordered to murder American hostages and destroy evidence of American military corruption. One by one, the helicopters began landing on the platform instead of firing missiles. Their pilots and crews were career military personnel who understood the difference between legitimate orders and criminal conspiracy. General Webb's voice came over Sarah's tactical radio, no longer cold and calculating, but desperate and panicked. "Blake, you have no idea what you've done. This operation was approved at the highest levels. You're destroying American national security." "No, General," Sarah replied, her voice carrying across international radio frequencies that were being monitored by news organizations and foreign governments. "I'm protecting it. The biggest threat to American national security is officers who are willing to murder American citizens for political gain." NTHE aftermath that nobody could have predicted. NTHE exposure of General Webb's false flag operation triggered the largest military corruption investigation in modern American history. Over the following months, the investigation revealed connections to defense contractors, foreign intelligence services, and political figures who had been profiting from decades of manufactured conflicts. Webb himself was court-martialed and sentenced to life in prison for treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and violations of international law. But more importantly, his downfall led to systematic reforms in military oversight that would prevent similar conspiracies in the future. Sarah's actions had saved not just 31 hostages, but potentially thousands of lives that would have been lost in the regional war that Webb's operation was designed to justify. NTHE recognition that meant more than any medal. NSIX months after the Persian Gulf operation, Sarah stood before a joint session of Congress receiving the Navy Cross. But the moment that moved her to tears wasn't the medal ceremony. It was when Congressman Maria Vasquez, the first Latina woman to chair the House Armed Services Committee, announced the establishment of the Sarah Blake Center for Military Ethics at the Naval Academy. Lieutenant Commander Blake proved that the greatest military strength comes not from following orders blindly, but from having the moral courage to question authority when authority is wrong, Vasquez said. Her example will guide future generations of military leaders who understand that their oath is to the Constitution and the American people, not to individual commanders who may have lost their way. NBUT, the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source: the families of the 31 hostages she had saved, NTHE letters that changed her perspective forever. And over the following year, Sarah received handwritten letters from each of the 31 engineers she had rescued. But the letter that meant the most came from Rebecca Martinez, a structural engineer who had been working on her first overseas assignment. Lieutenant Commander Blake, the letter began, "I am writing this on my wedding day. The man I'm marrying today is someone I met after I returned home from what we all thought would be our last day alive. You didn't just save my life. You saved my future, my children's future, and their children's future. Every generation of my family will know your name, and understand that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about doing what's right when everything inside you is terrified." NTHE letter included a photo from Rebecca's wedding. 30 other people who had been on the platform were in attendance, along with their spouses and children. At the bottom of the photo, someone had written, "The Sarah Blake family, 31 lives saved, countless futures made possible, NTHE program that became her true legacy." And after retiring from active duty, Sarah established the Kraken Leadership Institute, a program that trained military and civilian leaders in ethical decision-making under extreme pressure. The institute's motto, taken from her father's advice, was simple: "Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do because of who you are." NTHE Institute became required training for all Navy SEAL candidates, but its impact reached far beyond military applications. Corporate executives, emergency responders, and political leaders from around the world attended Sarah's programs to learn how to maintain moral clarity when facing impossible choices. NBUT, the program that meant the most to Sarah, was the one she never advertised: a private counseling and support network for military personnel who had been ordered to participate in illegal or unethical operations. NTHE international impact that surprised everyone. Sarah's story inspired military reforms in over 40 countries. Her testimony was cited in United Nations debates about military accountability and international law. Her techniques for ethical leadership under pressure became standard training in NATO Special Operations Forces. But perhaps the most unexpected impact came from Iran itself. The Iranian government, recognizing that they had been framed for an operation they had no involvement in, used Sarah's example to establish their own military ethics training program and opened diplomatic channels with the United States that had been closed for decades. Lieutenant Commander Blake's courage saved more than American hostages. Iranian Foreign Minister Hassan Rouhani said in a speech to the UN General Assembly, "Her commitment to truth over politics created an opportunity for dialogue that would not have existed if she had chosen personal safety over moral responsibility." NTHE next generation that carries her legacy forward. NTEN years after the Persian Gulf operation, Sarah received an invitation that brought everything full circle. The first class of female Navy SEAL candidates to complete training since her retirement was graduating, and they had requested her as their graduation speaker. Standing before 12 women who had endured the same hell week, the same impossible standards, and the same doubts from skeptics that she had faced, Sarah saw the future of American Special Operations. "You are not here to prove that women can be SEALs," she told the graduates. "You are here because you already proved that you are warriors who happen to be women. The ocean doesn't care about your gender when you're fighting to save lives. The enemy doesn't discriminate when they're shooting at you. And the people you rescue will only remember that someone cared enough to risk everything for them." NBUT. Her final words were the ones that would be remembered. "The depth of your courage will be measured not by how deep you can dive or how long you can hold your breath, but by how willing you are to surface above the pressure and speak truth when truth is dangerous." NTHE call that brought her back to active duty. 3 years later, Sarah received a call that she had been expecting since the day she retired. It was from Admiral Patricia Harrison, now chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "Sarah, we have a situation. American citizens are being held in a facility that can only be accessed through underwater approach. We need the best." Sarah looked out the window of her civilian office at the Kraken Leadership Institute, where she had been training the next generation of ethical leaders. She thought about her comfortable life, her successful programs, and the safety of civilian leadership roles. Then she thought about Americans who needed someone willing to dive into the depths and do the impossible. "How deep?" Sarah asked. 300 feet, in Arctic conditions, through waters that haven't been mapped." Sarah smiled. Admiral, I thought you were going to give me a real challenge. NTHE legend that never ends. NSIX months later, Sarah Blake was back in the water, leading a joint international rescue operation in the Arctic Ocean. The mission was classified, the risks were enormous, and the odds of success were minimal. In other words, it was exactly the kind of impossible challenge that had always brought out the best in the woman they called Kraken, because some heroes retire from active duty, but they never retire from answering the call when their country and their conscience demand action. NTHE Ocean was waiting, and Sarah Blake was ready to dive as deep as necessary to bring everyone home safe. After all, the depth of courage is measured not in feet below the surface, but in how